thank you. Our next talk is going to be by Kari, who's going to give us an overview of CONVERSE. And after that, we'll hear an overview of SC4D.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. So let's start off here. So let's just start off with the basics of what is CONVERSE. And so the CONVERSE vision really is to build networks of people, and to some extent expand it into infrastructure, to promote basically planning and facilitation and community building that will lead to more and better science that happens during eruptions. That's the essential goal. And this is motivated by a couple of NAS reports. First, the Erupt report. So one of the grand challenges there was to forecast the onset, size, duration, hazard of eruptions by integrating observations with quantitative models of magma dynamics. And then the 2020 Earth and Time Science priority questions, a number of these also focused on things like what drives volcanism and how can these be assessed and anticipated. These are science questions which require a community of people to answer. And as we've all heard, so just sitting here for this afternoon, I've heard a lot of talk about this, and I'm sure you heard more this morning, that doing effective volcano science really requires a community. And so CONVERSE is all about sort of building that community and facilitating that part of things. So it started off as a research coordination network funded by NSF in 2018 that went through 2022 with a few no-cost extensions and a little bit of a gap in some activities in the middle there, for reasons that I'm sure you're all aware of. And then it went to a Center Catalyst Award. So this is basically an award that is planning for trying to develop a full-on geohazard center. And then a geohazard center proposal was submitted a year ago in March. I would say that the chances of that proposal getting funded right now are vanishingly small, but because it has a lot to do with equity and diversity and inclusiveness. But nevertheless, there's a lot of good ideas there that I'm sure we will come back to in some form or another. Okay, CONVERSE goals. This is a lot of text. This is text from the proposal. I'm not going to read these things. Basically, it is a center. So moving forward into the next phase, what we would like to do is develop a coordinated center that basically is a locus for these kind of activities of community building and bringing people together and having this kind of activity, for example, to bring people together around volcanoes. And it was motivated partly because the recognition that in order to do this properly, we need both the academic side and the observatory side. I think Terry very effectively made the point that there are strengths to sort of both approaches to this, and especially in a volcanic eruption response, there are different roles that can be filled by different people. But in order to do that, you have to have a lot of pre-planning and you have to have a lot of trust between the people who are involved. So really, any kind of science that's going to get done during an eruption response requires people to have these talks, have this planning, and have these connections made before the eruption happens. So that's really a lot of what CONVERSE is about. So this is basically proposal speak to say that we're trying to build a broad community of volcano scientists to do more science during unrest and eruptions. And that then is useful, not just from the scientific aspects, but because of course, all of that science then feeds back into forecasting and response efforts. And so it's a virtuous circle there that we're hoping to promote. Okay, so what have we done so far? Since 2018, there's been a number of disciplinary workshops, running some eruption scenario exercises. We have some of these disciplinary workshops then resulted in a concept of having scientific advisory committees built. So we started with one in Hawaii, started out as Kilauea specific and then broadened to Hawaii. And the purpose of these advisory committees is to provide a single point of contact where people from outside the observatories can put in requests to do work or sort of have ideas to do work that requires some resources or personnel from the observatories. If you don't require any resources or personnel, there's no need to go through this committee. But if you do, this provides a single point of contact to make it easier for, say, the scientists in charge to handle all of these requests that are coming in. From the perspective of somebody who's interested in working during eruption response, this is useful because it means that you're not limited to the people get to work on the response who already know somebody on the site. And so it provides sort of advantages from both sides in that sense. We've also done some topical sessions at conferences, had a few publications describing what things come out. There was Scenario Building Institute, where got graduate students together to sort of provide data to build an eruption scenario that then can be used in teaching and in training and community building in the future. This next set of slides are from Tobias Fisher, who's one of, so Tobias Fisher and Bruce Houghton are the two main PIs on this project. And so these are slides to sort of summarize Converse from its inception. I'm not going to read through everything on here, obviously, or we'd be here forever, but I just want to point out a few things. They're color coded by the type of activity. So in blue are these workshops. And then there are some disciplinary workshops. And then there's things like an eruption scenario, pre-workshop meetings. And so just kind of flipping through this. So this starts in September 2018. And a couple of things I want to highlight. In December of 2020 was when Kilauea started another eruption cycle. So this was our first implementation of the Scientific Advisory Committee. It was stood up within 1 week over the Christmas holidays in 2020, which I think was actually kind of a remarkable achievement to do that. Then that has sort of transitioned. There was facilitated an NSF Rapid proposal. There were a number of various scenarios that were run. Right around in here in February 2022, submitted the proposal to continue this work for the geohazards proposal, for the track 1 preparation proposal. A number of other workshops and publications have come out. In among here, there's been a lot of sort of community outreach at meetings, IAFSE, NGU, basically wherever we can get that going. And then sort of in this, so going through now, basically we are sort of ending the sort of formal activities right now in hopes and anticipation of being able to continue in the next phase of things. So that's kind of where things stand at this point. In terms of building a community, this is just one metric of the community, and it's sort of I guess it's a minimum view of what's going on. This just tracks the number of people who were involved in various kinds of workshops that Converse put on through the years. And so it started off relatively small, a little over 100 people in one of the first ones, and now we're consistently getting a couple of hundred people involved in these workshops, and I think this is indicating that the purpose of trying to reach out and build this community is at least getting a little bit of traction. Hopefully we'll be able to have some momentum and continue that. Okay, this is a little bit more of a visual view of the kinds of activities. So these are the things from the RCN. You can see it started fairly small. The catalyst, there were a lot more activities, a lot more stuff going on. And then up at the top, it's a little bit more organized and what we would envision should a center actually happen in terms of a geohazard center. There would be 3 main types of activities with the center. Science activities, basically understanding what are the highest priority things to do scientifically. Workforce development activities, and then some stakeholder engagement. And all of these things would be coordinated in a volcano science Converse centered. This is a slightly different kind of graphical view of this. And all of these things then are intended to obviously feed into each other and play off of each other. And of course, this being the centerpiece, this is the vanishingly small chance of funding part of things. But I do think that this is one of the really important aspects of this, in the sense that really opening up volcano science to people who haven't had opportunities to get involved before is critical. We need to take advantage of all the resources that we have, including all of the people resources. Okay, so our aspirations are to I don't know, maybe obtain some private funding, but to basically move this forward and with a number of these goals. So identifying and addressing major scientific research questions that as a community are important both from the science aspects and from the hazards and response aspects of things. There's also in the proposal developing and coordinating an instrument pool that's focused on instrumentation that's not available in other formats. So this is something that could be, similar to AVERT in a way. Workforce development, diversification of the people who are involved in volcano science research, technical skill building, and then a lot of community and stakeholder engagement, because of course, we're not just doing this purely as an academic exercise and doing volcanic eruption response in order to affect societies and the people who are living near volcanoes. And that requires actual coordination with those groups of people. And so whether or not things get funded, we have been having a number of discussions, like I've had a number of discussions with folks at AVO about potentially trying to expand the SAC concept where it's useful and appropriate for volcano observatories. It seems like there might be some value for this in the Alaska scenario. So I would guess that regardless of funding, that's a concept that we're going to be pushing forward. And hopefully at least we can keep things going at that rate and then see where things end up. And that, I believe, is it. So I'll take questions.
So Jess Larson had a 1-minute lightning talking about the SAC that's been developed for Spur. What's the process for developing an SAC in Alaska? Do you have to wait for something to get exciting, or is there a standing committee, or?
Yeah, so the process of developing an SAC at this stage is, so I'm kind of the lead from the Converse side for the SACs. And so far this has involved me talking primarily with Michelle and whoever else at NBO who's been attending the recent meetings and trying to figure out, basically the SAC is a concept that has to be adapted to each observatory to make it useful, because each one has its own sort of goals and pluses and minuses. I mean, in Hawaii, one of the main focuses of the SAC is, as I said, to kind of be a point of contact for all of the people who want to work on a Hawaiian volcano when it's erupting, but who need resources and are clamoring for resources. Because of the accessibility in Alaska, that's less of an issue. So we've talked about in Alaska, it would look more like perhaps doing some more community building in advance, and then having sort of selected roles perhaps identified in advance. At Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, it might not be necessary at all. So this is one of these things where it's the process is evolving, I would say, and at this point, it's just sort of talking about what would be useful. In the end, I want to say that the part of the SAC concept is also not to make it a gatekeeper, but to make it has to at some level be a little bit of a filter in the sense of being a single point of contact. But for example, in Hawaii, we did not reject any kind of proposals to work in there if they were, and they had taxed them to a very low minimum scientific bar. It was just a question of whether the resources were there. So it's identifying what resources were needed and passing that on to the observatories to see if that was possible. So it's not, it's intended to broaden access, not to limit access. That's true. If anybody's interested in getting involved in Converse, assuming that it continues, please feel free to come talk to me.
Thank you.